Good afternoon, and I want to welcome you to this significant session of the Intercontinental Conference on Caring for Creation from around the United States, north of us in Canada, and from other parts of the world. We have people who have come to look at their religious commitment in a new way, to care for creation, to save the earth. This afternoon we are particularly, I might say, blessed and honored to have three very significant people who will be with us to share their light and their insight and their commitment to saving the earth, saving the planet and the ecosystems of the planet. Our first speaker, and one who has an exceedingly busy schedule, just got in from the Bergen Conference and other things in Europe, I believe earlier today or last night.
I didn't go.
Oh, you didn't go to Bergen, okay. Rerouted. Okay, that's all right. We're working on things, but has been going from, I might say, meeting to conference to Parliament to White House to major leaders around the world, bringing with him a vision and a commitment to conservation and environmental understanding and values in a way that is very significant in the 1990s. And for that reason, we are going to do something very special that I think, and the Board of Directors of the North American Conference on Religion and Ecology in a particular way, think is appropriate. And it's an award called the Eco3 Award, which I will presently explain. Through its Eco3 structure called the Eco3 Trialogue, the North American Conference on Religion and Ecology proposes to facilitate collaboration among ecumenists, ecologists, and economists. The meaning of the prefix eco comes from the Greek oikos, meaning household, family, community. All three collaborative partners share a common interest in the household of the earth. Ecumenists are those who come from the various faith communities, religious organizations, and spiritual traditions. They are working together from a shared faith or value perspective to renew the face of the earth and to care more responsibly for creation through their interfaith household. Ecologists are those who have an expertise or interest in the environmental or conservation movement. They also see scientifically that the household of nature, ecology, is in grave danger and now warrants a call for deeper ethical response to save the Earth's ecosystems. Economists, literally those who manage the household, are those managers and stewards who have the skills and responsibility to make the Earth community run in a just and sustainable fashion. These economists may be leaders from the public sector or the private one. They can be elected representatives or environmentally minded government people, business people, philanthropists, investors, executives, as well as trained economists. William Riley, administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, is given this award by the North American Conference on Religion and Ecology in recognition of his work in three areas. First, for his record as a conservationist. In his public and private life, William T. Riley has devoted his professional life to environmental issues. Throughout his career at the World Wildlife Fund and now as administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Mr. Riley has inspired his colleagues, offered vision and clarity to legislative and private initiatives for improving life on this earth and creating a significant platform from which to involve everyone in the process of environmental renewal. Secondly, William Riley is being given this ECO3 award for his long-standing and continued dedication to the spiritual dimension of the environmental issues confronting us today. Mr. Riley recognizes that for today's citizen, to be religiously committed means to be deeply committed to environmental issues and personally involved with caring for creation. William Riley has not only preached this reality, but has practiced it as well in the exemplary model of his own personal commitment to caring for Mother Earth. And thirdly, Mr. Riley is receiving this ECO3 award for his early and continued support of the efforts behind this conference. At a time when most of the environmental community had not yet begun to grasp the importance of the religious dimension, the value dimension to the environmental crisis, William Riley not only understood this fundamental fact of reality, he acted upon it by becoming one of NACRE's initial supporters and funders through his position as president of the World Wildlife Fund. For these reasons, we award to William T. Riley this afternoon the ECO3 award, and we give him something that will remind him of his history and of ecology and of the environment. And as I give him this Waterford crystal vase full of beautiful spring flowers, I want you to know that we wanted to have not just a plaque, or not something simply to hang on your wall, but you may be getting one of those too. But we're giving you this, Bill, with really sincere thanks and a heartfelt feeling within the community here that you are a genuine leader who combines the best of both a spiritual commitment to see that we must care for creation and a respect for science and economics that makes you realistic in this pursuit. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll put it on the...
Take it right over
I better just announce it. You have to... Because of the very rapid nature of his work and the unbelievable amount of things to do, Bill Riley will have to leave us after his talk, but I believe his presence among us both honors us and connotes the very important decisions we are making here in responding to the bioregional plans and calling forth religious leadership to work with scientists, ecologists, and economists to make this a truly sustainable and regenerative Earth. Bill Riley.
Well, thank you very, very much, Don. That is a moving introduction and really a touching dedication and perfectly appropriate gift. These spring flowers, the early fruits of the spring creation. I am very honored to be the first presented with this ECO3 award, and I'm particularly touched to be recognized in the category of economist. I fear that you may do violence by that categorization both to the profession and perhaps to my reputation in some quarters in one fell swoop. But, and in other quarters, I guess I have to confess, you will simply astonish by suggesting that degree of sensitivity to economics on my part. But from my point of view, it is a very satisfying honor that you confer on me, and I really appreciate it. I'm here to discuss issues to which I attach great significance with many old friends and some colleagues. And I'm here, I should warn you at the outset, as is often true, I find, in my present position, to talk about a lot of things that I probably know much less about than most of you. That hasn't deterred me yet, and a lawyer, there are those who would say a lawyer talking about moral and spiritual values should be disqualified at the start. But I do feel strongly about some of these issues. I compliment the concerns and efforts that have brought you together, and I very much hope that they're successful. I think they're vitally important to the achievement of objectives that certainly as Administrator of EPA are very important to me in my public duties, and I think more fundamentally significant to the spiritual development and to the reconciliation of humans with nature, which I take to be our common concern. One of the most interesting and arresting phenomena in nature is the coming together of two great rivers, the Missouri and the Mississippi north of St. Louis, the Allegheny and the Monongahela, which join together at Pittsburgh, the Rio Negro and the Solimões that form the mighty Amazon at Manaus. From the air, as I remember, particularly in the case of that latter great confluence, it's possible to see how two great rivers flow together for a time without fully merging, each retaining its distinctive color, its mud, its minerals, or even its pollution. But finally, they flow into each other, and they become broader and far more powerful than either tributary. Such confluences occur not only in nature. When men and women of faith marched and suffered at the Selma Bridge, their message in word and deed was that racism is evil. They added a vital moral force to a movement to reform the law, a force that joined a demanding and irresistible moral current to the milder movement of our laws. Together, moral indignation and legal reform created a new reality, and as a result, civil rights received an enduring sanction. This conference of ecumenists, economists, and ecologists must aspire to create such a confluence. It is time to recognize, I think, both the achievements but also the limitations of the movement that has been called environmentalism. It is time to acknowledge the important spiritual dimension that the community of faith can bring to efforts to protect the environment. Fundamentally, environmentalism is about reconciling humanity more satisfactorily with the natural systems upon which human life and civilization depend. During the past 20 years, the United States has made great progress in protecting its environment. My friend, the writer Rice Odell, has identified three great achievements of environmentalism during this period. First and most obviously, the air is more healthful. Rivers and lakes are cleaner. Parks and wilderness preserves are larger and more numerous. Whales and bald eagles are coming back. Second, Americans have a genuinely new way of looking at things. We are somewhat more future-oriented and set quality of life concerns of health, safety, the experience of unspoiled nature, alongside economic growth and materialism. By no means have we abandoned our economic aspirations. Economic growth during these same 20 years was significant, and it generated the wealth necessary to pay for pollution control. But we have redefined our economic aspirations and have adjusted them and have imbued them with new concepts that represent more demanding expectations. We speak now of sustainable development and recognize a wider web of life in which we see ourselves dependent on a natural order that embraces other species. To some of these species, humans have always shown affection. The furry animals come immediately to mind. But increasingly, while we may not love the swamp rat, we do exhibit a certain reverence for the distinctive life form he represents, and our laws provide some protection for the niche in nature he occupies. This reverence is a rationalist, not a religious sort of thing. It's based on a Darwinian insight that all life forms are related and ever-evolving in a mutually supportive progression. We may need the swamp rat, depend on him even in ways science has yet to discover. Maybe he thrives on a pest, regulates a natural system, has some still to be determined role in keeping it all going. We are not certain. That very humility in the face of natural phenomena is an environmentalist innovation. What we don't understand, we forbear to disturb, alter, or destroy. So often, humankind has gotten it wrong where nature was concerned, that there is wisdom in technological caution. A third great achievement of environmentalism has been its development of some key legal concepts and its advancement of their acceptance and effect. The need for public analysis of environmental impact of decisions, the reasonableness of demanding that alternatives be considered, the right to know about toxic emissions from plants, the right to sue the government without claiming an economic interest. These once novel ideas have been advocated, advanced, and codified in law. They're generally accepted by the society as reasonable and necessary to good government, and their influence is profound. In Odell's view, these reforms have contributed to a more refined democracy and have conspicuously advanced the democratization of society. Well, I have described some of the contributions and achievements of environmentalism. These reforms were conceived in 1960s protest, born in anger and outrage at pollution you could see, touch, and smell. Now they have become accepted, but they are not enough. The world today faces two kinds of threats that require more than mere laws to address. First, while we have confronted and tamed many of the most egregious sources of pollution, at least in the United States and Western Europe, we now must come to grips with pollution sources that are scattered, diffuse, and individual. We must come to grips with individual behavior and with the consequences of the way we lead our lives, with very high levels of waste per capita, with water pollution that does not come from the end of a pipe, but that runs off farms and city streets, and with air pollution that comes from cars idling in congestion. Our laws work less well at confronting problems of this scale, and so the Bush administration is seeking new ways to fashion laws to design economic incentives that reward behavior that is environmentally responsible. Government command and control approaches may well have taken us about as far as they can. The second kind of threat that we have only recently begun to understand and acknowledge is the danger posed to the global environment, the threat to the very stability of critical life support systems of the planet. Our discovery of the ozone hole over the Antarctic, more recently over the Arctic, have revealed how destructive human activity can be and how far advanced it can become before it's identified. Correcting for ozone depletion, and that ozone hole now is as large in size as the continental United States, will take many decades. Long after humans have ceased to manufacture the chlorofluorocarbons, these long-lived chemicals will still be migrating up to the stratosphere and destroying its protective layer of ozone, exposing us all to more cancers and more cataracts. I have frequently spoken to the need to foster economic incentives to address environmental problems. I believe very strongly that we must work to ensure that economic incentives line up with environmental goals for protecting the ozone layer, or reducing acid rain, or conserving tropical forests. But it also is increasingly clear that we must go beyond compulsion, laws, and incentives. We must engage the heart, which is not reached by appeals to law or science. In 1986, the Duke of Edinburgh, in his capacity as president of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, convened representatives of 5 major religions in Assisi to prepare statements about human responsibility for nature. Christians, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, and Buddhists all joined together in a beautiful and historic act of celebration, of prayer, in the historic Basilica of St. Francis, the church where the saint is buried. Each of the representatives of the religions in attendance, and later the Baha'is and the Sikhs, issued statements setting out their faith's theological basis for supporting the conservation of nature. Each of these faiths came together, reflected, and on the basis of their tradition and their history, their scripture, prepared thoughtful theological statements. And these statements are very powerful appeals to the faithful, to believers, to recognize the implications of their beliefs for their conduct regarding the environment. The reasoning behind initiatives such as the Assisi meeting, and I guess this conference as well, has been expressed in an insightful series of lectures by John D. Zizioulas, Eastern Orthodox Bishop of Pergamon. He's written of the great confidence Western societies place in ethics, whether enforced by legislation or taught by churches. However, he argues, by appealing to human reason, we do not necessarily make people better. While moral rules, especially after their dissociation from religious beliefs, prove to be more and more meaningless and unpleasant to modern man. There are, he writes, other forces, besides the human intellect, that decide the direction in which the fate of the world moves. Theology and the church ought to embrace areas other than the ethical, that is, the rational prescription of behavior, if they are to be of any use in this case. Well, as a government official, my concern is necessarily with laws. For you, as leaders of the community of faith, the focus is on values and fundamental beliefs. You, therefore, deal with the whole person, not merely with behavior, but with the well springs that feed a fuller worldview. Where I am concerned with pollution, you are concerned with creation and with the basic relationship faith should imply for conserving the natural order. I congratulate you on coming together, on uniting ecumenists, economists, and ecologists to reflect on the fate of the earth and on the full dimensions of individual personhood. President Bush spoke to the duty of the individual during a visit to Spokane, Washington last September. He said, through millions of individual decisions, simple, everyday personal choices, we are determining the fate of the earth. The new alliance inaugurated here today can make a powerful contribution to inculcating that sense of responsibility the President spoke to. This alliance will help us, as Don Conroy put it, to dream a new dream of the creation truly renewed, a dream of a creation in which we all care for the air, for the animals, and for the ecosystems. In his 1990 World Day of Peace message, Pope John Paul II added his voice to the growing number of religious leaders who have recognized the spiritual dimensions of environmental problems. Last January, I called upon the U.S. Catholic Conference to issue a pastoral letter on nature and the environment. I set out several specific issues such a letter might usefully address. And I call upon you to do the same thing within every North American faith tradition represented here today. In the next year, I would like to see each faith, each denomination represented here, formulate its own authoritative restatement of the moral and spiritual basis for the stewardship of nature. These statements could have a powerful influence for environmental betterment on individuals, on policymakers, on business leaders, on citizens of all faiths. Although I realize that one very powerful message of this conference is to go back to your home communities with action as opposed to words, I hope that one result of that action will be the statements for which I am calling, statements that I think could have a significant impact on parishes, on churches, on communities all across North America. Such statements, I would hope, would make a significant difference, not only in the making of laws, but also in the keeping of laws. There simply are limits to what laws can achieve. Among the burdens of modern life that chafe upon free and creative people are layers of requirements, rules and regulations administered by large bureaucracies. Surely one of the sources of alienation and discouragement in modern life is the daily encounter with large organizations to whom ordinary individuals just don't seem to matter very much. Try as we will to limit our laws to issues that really do matter to the well-being, health, and safety of society, we contribute sometimes to a deadening of the spirit. And the truth is that laws cannot ultimately do all that we ask of them. To that discovery, we must not respond by adding ever more restrictions and requirements. Instead, we must respond by recognizing the role of education, of non-governmental groups, and of belief. I would urge you not to direct your recommendations to government, but rather to individuals. Let me be clear. Whether in caring for the poor, or achieving racial justice, or protecting the environment, government has a large and vigorous responsibility. But it is not enough. When consumers buy green products, when drivers use clean fuels, when people opt to recycle or improve energy efficiency, these are decisions that, made on a large scale, can matter more than laws. And you are in a position to inform and inspire such choices, to give greater meaning and significance to everyday decisions, not as imposed requirements, but as willed and informed personal commitments. This society, I believe, is open to such values. We aspire to be more than a civilization of consumption and consumerism, a throwaway society that uses, discards, and then moves on, leaving its mess behind. We do not want to define success merely as having more, but also as being more. You in this audience and the institutions you represent are concerned as much, probably more than others, with defining what it means to be more. So I wish you well, and I thank you for listening to this lawyer bureaucrat go beyond his brief. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To introduce our next speaker is a man who has shown the ability to touch the life of the church in the 20th century and of all religions, by his both intellectual and ringmaster ability, I might say. He has the ability to convene all types of people, from the President Havel recently, the magnificent ceremony in St. John the Divine, to stand with Dr. Carl Sagan in Moscow, with Secretary Gorbachev in January, when they made the appeal to scientists and religious leaders to join hands to save the earth. So without further ado, I give you Dean James Parks Morton.
Well, my friends, I have the honor of introducing to you Carl Sagan, but it's really like introducing a scientist in the scientific realm who corresponds in the religious realm, say, to introducing the Dalai Lama or to Archbishop Tutu or to Mother Teresa. Because on the one hand, they're all household words. You know, when you sort of think religion, you say, well, yeah, like Mother Teresa. And when you think science, you sort of say, like Carl Sagan. But so much more, because those three religious folks are certainly amazing exemplars of their particular faith traditions, but you can't keep them in a box any more than you can keep Carl Sagan in a box, because he's all over the place, and that's what's so fantastic. But before introducing him, I do want to say something not about the august folks who are up here, but about the august folks who are out there. Because I think what makes this Washington meeting really very interesting is the fact that bringing together sort of religious folks who are involved in the environment is really new. At the Cathedral, we've been involved in environmental programs since 1972, and we really could count on perhaps one hand other religious organizations in America, because we were really looked upon as strange ducks. You know, I mean, you're religious people, well, why are you concerned about rivers? You know, why are you concerned about green things? And all you have to do is read a certain cardinal who happens to live in New York's sermon on Earth Day to find out where religion still has to go to get the message. But you folks, who by and large are lay people, have been the people in the trenches in the environmental movement. And you've been doing that out of your synagogues or out of your churches or just out of your own convictions in your own backyards and in your own city lots. And that, to me, is what's so extraordinary about finding an occasion when you, who are really the fighters in this peaceful war, are in one room. And so, with all due respect to those on the platform, I think the real credit is to those who were in the round tables, and I salute you. Now, into introducing Carl. We go back about a decade. We started a series of free concerts at the Cathedral on New Year's Eve, and he and Leonard Bernstein sort of took the cake, and they were it was the first one, and Carl spoke about on New Year's Eve, nuclear winter. That was how many years ago? When did you? 84, okay, 6 years ago. And part of our loneliness at St. John the Divine has been that our buddies in this have really all been scientists and some anthropologists and some philosophers. René Dubose starting with us in 75, and Lovelock in 79, and Bucky Fuller in 80, and it's nice to see some of the people who are here, Brian Swim and Peter Berg. Really, we've been working with, but we haven't been working with, quote, religious folks because there weren't any that we could, sort of reverse collar types, with the exception of perhaps Tom Berry, and we were saying up here, Professor Joe Sittler at the University of Chicago. There were very, very few professional, quote, quote, religious types on the environmental agenda. And so that's the great change. But Carl was one of those heroic scientists who dared to go into one of these hot religious places. We just emerged from a press conference, and he was asked, was he an atheist or was he a theist? And he'll give you an answer in a minute. But it was really wonderful. Now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to tell you all the stuff that Carl has done. And it's going to be very. I'm not going to tell you all the stuff he's done because there's 2 pages. You'll all go to sleep. But he is the David Duncan Professor of Astronomy and Space Sciences. He is the director of the Lab for Planetary Studies, and these are both at Cornell. And he played a leading role in the Mariner and the Viking and the Voyager expeditions to the planets, for which he got the NASA medal. He's published more than 600 scientific papers, but like Bishop Tutu, they're not just, in-house stuff. He's written many, many popular books, and he got the Emmy and the Peabody Award for his television series, Cosmos, which I'm sure many of you saw. It was in 60 countries, and it was looked at by 300 million people. And then that, of course, had a book along with it. So his just extraordinary output and recognition in the scientific community, but in the larger humanistic community, is extraordinary. Well, that's one thing. But what I want to sort of leave you with in introducing Carl is this really amazing thing that comes out of his understanding of things, which is very political. And it's an effort that we've been involved together in, really starting in 1988, when together we were part of a remarkable conference in Oxford, along with Mother Teresa and the Dalai Lama and a great cast of characters, on trying to get the political community and the religious community joining forces. And after that, and in preparation for the Moscow conference that was just this past January, we thought, wouldn't it be really important, even more important than political and religious leaders, to get scientific and religious leaders making common cause for the saving of the environment. And Carl will describe this in detail, but starting a year ago, we put together, and he sent out an appeal to a number of distinguished scientists around the world, Nobel laureates, scientists in this country, in France, in Israel, in Russia, all over the place. And when their responses came back, and the request that he made was, we want to make common cause with religious leaders. Are you with that? Some 37 most distinguished men and women around the world said yes. And this appeal is on the table over there, so get a copy as you leave the session. And then I assume the responsibility for sending the appeal with the signatures of the 37 scientists to religious leaders around the world. We now have some 300 signatures of really top people in the world saying, yes, we religious people want to make common cause with the scientists so that together we can work to cherish the earth. Now that's going to take a long time, but what it does represent is really a new threshold. But new thresholds are what Carl Sagan's all about. So, Mr. Threshold.
Thank you, Jim, for that most generous introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you, and because we're about half an hour behind schedule and I had wanted to leave time for questions from the audience, I'll try to shorten what I had intended to say. This is a most peculiar issue, that humans have become, in this innocent manner, a danger to themselves. We're not here talking about nuclear war, where at least there is some intent to do harm. We're talking about the most innocent acts of burning a lump of coal or developing a harmless and inert material to act as the working fluid in refrigerators and air conditioners. Who would have figured that that would pose a danger? When we started out, we humans, a few 100,000 years ago, or if you take the genus Homo, maybe a few million years ago, there were, of course, very few of us. We lived in East Africa. Our technology was rudimentary, and we had no idea of posing a danger to the global environment. We didn't have an idea of there being a global environment. Nevertheless, if contemporary hunter-gatherer societies are any guide, we had a very profound sense of living in harmony with nature, as all the rest of the plants and animals do, because those who don't are dead. And so natural selection produces such a harmony, and there's no question that we were part of such a harmony. Now imagine the pages falling from the calendar. The advantage of the human species, selective advantage, is our intelligence, our ability to foresee the future consequences of present actions, and our hands, which permit us to build. And with those tools, we have gone to every part of the earth. Some of us live under the oceans. Some of us live in space. We have been astonishingly successful. Our numbers now are 5.3 billion, and our technology has reached formidable, if not awesome, proportions. If there was no concept of having stewardship of the earth a million years ago, today there is at least a very great need. If you stand back from the earth, as those Apollo astronauts did in the late 60s, and photograph the earth from a distance in space so you can see the whole earth, there's this blue aura that you can see surrounding the day-lit hemisphere. And it's just the atmosphere seen edge on. And what is most impressive, what many astronauts have remarked upon, is how thin, how fragile, how vulnerable it seems. The thickness of the Earth's atmosphere compared to the size of the Earth is about the same as the thickness of a coat of shellac on a library globe of the Earth. There isn't much air. And so we now have the prospect of inadvertently endangering the life-supporting environment, the environment that supports the human species and many other species, of committing what religious people sometimes call crimes against creation. There's a wide range of these problems that I know you've talked about at this meeting. There are some local, some regional, and some global. Let me talk about the two of the global issues, in part because they are among the most serious, and in part because they force upon us a way of thinking which is novel to many, although it certainly has deep roots in the world's religious communities. Those two problem areas are ozone depletion and greenhouse warming. The ozone layer, if brought down to the pressure and temperature of this room, would be about that thick, about 3 millimeters thick. There isn't much ozone. It protects us against dangerous ultraviolet light from the sun, which, if not impeded, if it could reach the surface of the Earth, would produce a range of catastrophes. The one that's most discussed is skin cancer, especially in light-skinned people like me. Dark-skinned people are much better protected. And that certainly would be serious, but that's minor compared to the other longer-term consequences, which include a challenge to the human immune system, the ability to fight disease. If the ozone layer is breached and people have to spend some time out of doors, it's something like getting a global case of AIDS, except there's nothing special you have to do to get the AIDS, except keep voting for the same politicians. And then still more serious is the fact that increased ultraviolet light damages the microorganisms that are at the base of the food chain upon which the rest of us depend. So the simplest example of this is the oceanic food chain, where at the ocean surface there is a community of one-celled microscopic plants called phytoplankton. And they harvest sunlight. They're primary photosynthetic producers, but since they're at the surface of the oceans, if there's more ultraviolet light getting through the ozone layer, they are vulnerable to a depletion in the ozone layer. Well, these guys are eaten by little one-celled animals, which are eaten by little shrimp-like crustacea, which are eaten by little fish, which are eaten by bigger fish, which are eaten by, and so on. And then at the top of this ecological pyramid are dolphins, whales, and people. And on the land, there is a similar food chain in which, again, the primary photosynthetic producers are vulnerable. So if you eliminate the organisms at the base of the food chain, then the rest of the food chain collapses as well. That's the ultimate danger of ozone depletion. Greenhouse warming is the buildup of invisible gases. Their invisibility is precisely part of the problem, because you can't just by looking see that there's a danger, which keep the heat in and build up the temperature of the Earth, producing great regions of drought in continental interiors, including the American Midwest, and through the volume expansion of seawater and the melting of polar ice, sea level rising. And some of the projections for the end of the next century are extremely serious: drought, the destruction of croplands worldwide, an assault on natural ecosystems, and a rising of sea level sufficient to, for example, flood Bangladesh and produce tens of millions of environmental refugees. These problems are very serious. They are happening, however, slow enough that it's possible to do something about it. The slowness is an advantage in that respect, but a great disadvantage in another respect, in that the changes are occurring on timescales longer than the terms of office of politicians. If a politician can take a presumed unpopular action, which will, in his or her estimation, benefit the politician while still in office, then that's the kind of risk that politicians are willing to take. If the benefit, however, happens 10 or 30 or 50 years in the future to benefit some other office holder, then from the narrow perspective of getting reelected, it's not nearly so attractive. These long timescales represent one of the novel problems of these global environmental issues. Now, I want to stress that we are not absolutely certain what the configuration of danger will be. For the ozone layer, we can already clearly see it. There's no question of, is there an ozone depletion? There is this enormous hole over Antarctica, about which William Riley talked, a smaller one over the Arctic, and a clear thinning of the ozone layer at intermediate latitudes, including the latitude of Washington. And the telltale chlorine atoms of the CFCs have been found in association with the ozone depletion. So there it's very clear what's happening. You stop making CFCs and other sources of ozone depleting chemicals, and the ozone layer will, on a time scale of 100 years, heal itself. But note the time scale. Make heroic actions now, and the ultimate benefit is a century hence. Delay longer, the healing is also delayed longer. On greenhouse warming, there is not yet so clear a signature. There is a range of what in this business are called sophisticated computer models, but of course they're only as sophisticated as the people who write the computer programs. But there are 5 different such programs. They all give consonant answers. They predict correctly the very different climates of, say, Mars and Venus. Venus, by the way, having a surface temperature of 900 Fahrenheit, hotter than the hottest household oven, hot enough to melt tin and lead because of a massive carbon dioxide greenhouse effect there. I'm not suggesting that there were once a species of Venusians who drove fuel-inefficient automobiles, and that's why Venus is in trouble. But the idea of an Earth-like world gone to such hellish conditions is worthy of note. By the way, the surface, this is a theological aside, the surface conditions of Venus are remarkably similar to the classic religious view of hell, in case you have to confront a skeptic who wants to know where it is. I thought I'd provide a little help here and there on theological matters where I am able. Those same computer models correctly predict the past climate of the Earth. They correctly predict the present climate of the Earth. It is reasonable that they are correctly predicting the future climate of the Earth given the amount of CO2 and other greenhouse gases that we're pouring into the atmosphere. Maybe not. Maybe there's some undiscovered mistake that all of the scientists involved in these models are making. It's not impossible. We can't be 100% sure. But which is more prudent? Which is wiser? To do nothing and hope that a mistake has been made? Or to take these predictions seriously, even if there's a chance the precautions you will take will be unnecessary? I want now to come back to this issue by discussing what it is that has to be done. And then let's think about them in the context of, will we really be angry at ourselves for having taken these steps if the computer models are wrong? So what should you do? First thing you should do is stop producing CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons. See, they do double duty. Not only do they destroy the ozone layer, they are an important greenhouse gas. They'll get us one way or another. So we should stop producing them. And indeed, in a remarkable and important agreement of most of the relevant nations, there is a so-called Montreal Protocol in which essentially all the CFC producing nations except for India and China, 2 important exceptions, have agreed to cut by 1/2 their production of these molecules by the turn of the century. It's important, its precedent is important, but it's not nearly enough. Those gases should be reduced to 0. That's the first thing we ought to do. Secondly, to mitigate greenhouse warming, we should use fossil fuels more efficiently. By that I mean, if I had a car that went 70 miles a gallon instead of one that went 25 miles a gallon, I would not be putting as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for each mile that I go in driving my car. This is a kind of technological solution or mitigation of the problem. On the other hand, there's not something that we can do as individuals. I cannot go and drive a 75 mile per gallon automobile because they are not commercially available. So it's no good to tell me, as my friend Mr. Riley did, that we shouldn't complain to the government or the industry, we should just do it ourselves. How shall I go about by myself driving a 75 mile per gallon automobile? I'll be glad to take instruction on this issue. I'm ready. But seems to me this requires some activity in Washington and Detroit. Ultimately, we're going to want to phase out fossil fuels. We're going to want to convert to an alternative energy economy. And what that is, we can still discuss, but in my view, it is unlikely to be nuclear power for all the obvious pollution concerns, and much more promising is solar power, which produces no greenhouse gases and does not involve radioactivity, and is already economically competitive with fossil fuels if we take account of the environmental cost of the burning of those fossil fuels. That's the kind of technology we should be after. And incidentally, because developing countries tend to be located in equatorial latitudes where there's more sunlight, this is also an ideal kind of technology. And could be for them, and could be much more indigenous, that is, the technology homegrown, than big fission or fusion reactors. Then we should grow trees. Trees take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We need massive reforestation on a global scale. Instead, what we are doing right now is destroying an acre of forest every second. Think about that for just a second. There goes an acre. A whole acre of forest every second, day after day, year after year. We're being extremely stupid. And then the final thing, in my view, which has to happen, has to do with world population growth. Because even if we took the most heroic measures about stopping the production of CFCs and making much greater fossil fuel efficiency, and then on a longer time scale converting to alternatives to fossil fuels, and grow enormous amounts of new forests, even then we would be not out of the woods at all if the number of new humans overwhelms the steps we're taking. Every human being has a right to live, and what's more, even in exceptionally poor countries, in your everyday life, you produce carbon dioxide. So if we look at who are the biggest polluters on the planet in terms of greenhouse gases, number one by far is the United States, something we should take just pride in. Number two is the Soviet Union. Number three is the developing countries put together. So it's not an issue of high technology versus low technology, although that per capita, of course, Americans do much more than people in Equatorial Guinea. But even people without elaborate industrial economies make significant contributions to the burning of wood to the greenhouse problem. And by the way, I can talk about it in the question period at greater length, but in my opinion, the only appropriate way of approaching the solution of world population growth is by helping to raise the per capita income of the poorest billion people on the planet. What? It's a thing called the demographic transition, and it happens in capitalist countries, in communist countries, in Catholic countries, in Buddhist countries, East and West. It's fabulously ecumenical. And what it is poor people have lots of children not because they're stupid and not because they don't know about birth control, although those things, having birth control access helps, of course, but because they make a kind of desperate cost-benefit analysis that if their children are dying at an enormous rate, if they have lots of children, then there might be some to survive to help with whatever the domestic economy is, and maybe even survive to such a time when the parents are too old and would help the parent. It's the only available social security for 1 billion poor people on the planet. When the per capita income rises and there are alternative sources of help for the meager plot of land and help for the old age of the parents, then without the government ever saying a word, the population growth rate turns around. And I find this is true of many Americans. Think back 3 generations in your own family. How many children did your great-great-grandmother have? How many children do you or your siblings have? And you will see a substantial drop in almost every case in the birth rate. And that has happened because the economy has improved, the per capita income has gone up in this most affluent nation. Those are the steps which need to be taken. How many of them can be done by individual effort? It seems to me that this is a case where the main driver has to be government and industry. And there is, of course, a role for individuals. And that is one of the blessings of democracies. And that is, individuals can play their part by voting out of office recalcitrant politicians. It's very straightforward. I can't improve the greenhouse effect much on my own by my own energy economy at home. I can make some contribution, but I can make a bigger contribution by voting against politicians who say that they can't do anything about this problem. There was 2 or 3 weeks ago in Washington a international conference on the greenhouse effect hosted by the White House. This is the one where the White House was accused of urging study rather than doing anything, of going slow, of stressing uncertainties, to the enormous annoyance of delegates from all over the world, especially from Western Europe. It's almost nobody who supported the United States position on this. And at the end, U.S. delegates were reduced to saying, oh, we're not just for studying, we want to do things too, but didn't specify anything in particular. There was a very telling diagram in the White House handouts. It was stressing the complex issues involved here, and each issue that was stressed had a little cartoon to make it clear to people who had difficulty reading what the issue was. And there was one issue called balance. And what it showed was a traditional pen scales, 2 trays. In one tray was the planet Earth. And then balancing it on the other tray were 4 bars of gold. A balance. 4 bars of gold, the Earth. Well, don't want to fix the Earth because it might cost money. I think that is a very revealing as well as a very bad example for the White House to be telling us. Yes, economic growth is important. Yes, it's even conceivable that poor people benefit if rich people make more money. But if the environment that sustains all of us is significantly deteriorating, I suggest that even the people who are making money are going to be in trouble. Industry is going to be in trouble. The national economy is going to be even in more trouble. And this is the classic battle between short-term and long-term, which is central to the issue that we're fighting. Well, in an attempt to try to deal in a practical sense with these issues, as Jim Morton mentioned to you, it occurred to us that this was a time for science and religion to see if they could work together on this most important question. So I wrote an appeal, was able to get a number of very distinguished scientists from many nations, men and women, to sign it. And then, through the good offices of Dean Morton, this appeal was distributed to the world religious community, or some representative sample of it, with very striking success. The letter that was sent to religious leaders was signed, besides Dean Morton, by Theodore Hesburgh, former president of the University of Notre Dame, the Reverend Leonid Kishkovsky, the president of the National Council of Churches, Sheikh Ahmad Kuftaro, the Grand Mufti of Syria, and Elie Wiesel, Nobel Peace Laureate. And in the brochure put out by the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, there's a list of the categories of signatories: 37 heads of national and international religious bodies, 50 cardinals, lamas, archbishops, head rabbis, patriarchs, mullahs, and bishops, 17 indigenous religious leaders, 55 professors of theology, seminary presidents, cathedral deans, heads of religious orders, and so on. It's breathtakingly ecumenical, who the signatories are, and I think shows a very great promise that religious people worldwide recognize that this is a serious issue and are willing to work to solve it. I'd like to read to you the last part of this appeal. We first describe some of the issues, as I have done here, and then go on to say, by their very nature, these assaults on the environment were not caused by any one political group or any one generation. Intrinsically, they are transnational, transgenerational, and trans-ideological. So are all conceivable solutions. To escape these traps requires a perspective that embraces the peoples of the planet and all the generations yet to come. Problems of such magnitude and solutions demanding so broad a perspective must be recognized from the outset as having a religious as well as a scientific dimension. Mindful of our common responsibility, we scientists, many of us long engaged in combating the environmental crisis, urgently appeal to the world religious community to commit in word and in deed, and as boldly as is required, to preserve the environment of the earth. Some of the short-term mitigations of these dangers, such as greater energy efficiency, rapid banning of chlorofluorocarbons, or modest reductions in the nuclear arsenals, are comparatively easy and, at least at some level, are already underway. But other, more far-reaching, more long-term, more effective approaches will encounter widespread inertia, denial, and resistance. In this category are conversion from fossil fuels to a non-polluting energy economy, a continuing swift reversal of the nuclear arms race, and a voluntary halt to world population growth, without which many of the other approaches to preserve the environment will be nullified. As on issues of peace, human rights, and social justice, religious institutions can here too be a strong force encouraging national and international initiatives in both the private and public sectors, and in the diverse worlds of commerce, education, culture, and mass communication. The environmental crisis requires radical changes, not only in public policy, but also in individual behavior. The historical record makes clear that religious teaching, example, and leadership are powerfully able to influence personal conduct and commitment. As scientists, many of us have had profound experiences of awe and reverence before the universe. We understand that what is regarded as sacred is more likely to be treated with care and respect. Our planetary home should so be regarded. Efforts to safeguard and cherish the environment need to be infused with a vision of the sacred. At the same time, a much wider and deeper understanding of science and technology is needed. If we do not understand the problem, it is unlikely we will be able to fix it. Thus, there is a vital role for both religion and science. And then the last paragraph reads, "We know that the well-being of our planetary environment is already a source of profound concern in your councils and congregations. We hope this appeal will encourage a spirit of common cause and joint action to help preserve the earth." So I'm very encouraged that this document, which I consider to be not pulling a lot of punches, has received such strong and ecumenical support. I'd like to conclude with just a couple of other remarks. There is a passage in the book of Proverbs that haunts me in this context, although of course it wasn't written in this context. It goes, "They set an ambush for their own lives." And it seems to me that through the unthinking development of our enormously powerful technology, we are in danger of doing just that. But it is certainly not too late. We have caught the problems early enough, and all it takes is a deep, committed dedication to solve these issues. And it seems to me that there is a peculiar silver lining. And it goes like this. Molecules don't have passports. They're exceptionally stupid. They don't understand the profound importance of the idea of national sovereignty. So you strike a match or burn a lump of coal or drive your car, and the carbon dioxide is wafted up and carried by the general circulation of the Earth's atmosphere everywhere. No one nation can solve the greenhouse or ozone depletion problem. It has to be done by everybody on Earth. It requires a global effort. So these problems, as I said in the appeal, have an intrinsic trans-ideological, transnational, and transgenerational aspect to them. It doesn't matter what your ideology is. If you want to resolve these problems, you're going to have to work closely with other nations. And if you truly want to understand what this issue is about, you must be concerned about generations as yet unborn. It seems to me that binding up of the earth and of the generations is something that many religious traditions have talked about, and here is a case in which if we do not embrace these broad and grand perspectives, we are in the deepest of trouble. I believe we are an intelligent species, we are equal to this task, and we are about to see a transformation of human society. Thank you.
Superb. Is Dr. Malone there? We have the chairman of our board, Dr. Thomas Malone, to introduce the next speaker, who is a theologian who has, over the years, done some rather remarkable and penetrating studies that probe into faith and reason, in naming the whirlwind, and in other things. I'm going to ask for Dr. Malone. Where are you? There. Oh, there he is. He's going to come and yes, we're going to have the questions after Dr. Gilkey. And so the chairman of our board, Dr. Tom Malone, is widely known in the halls of science and in other realms as one of the chief atmospheric scientists and one of those who deal with global realities. I won't go into all his pedigree and all his works, but as immediate past president of Sigma Psi, the scientific society, and international secretary for the National Academy of Sciences, he has done much to advance the cause of science at this crucial time. And in facing the global crisis, he has challenged and encouraged us in the faith communities of the world to take up a new challenge. Tom Malone.
Thank you, Don. The deliberations of the past several days, it seems to me, have confirmed the conviction that an increasingly interdependent world society is at a crossroad. Three options lie before us: to snuff out civilization with a nuclear exchange. That's one. Second, to strangle civilization by exceeding the carrying capacity of planet Earth. And there's a third option, is to use our innate reason and intrinsic creativity to see a probable future and to envision a possible future consistent with the dignity of individual human beings. And what is required, and it says so in the book of Proverbs, where there is no vision, the people perish. We've just heard an example of a man with great vision from the scientific field. And now we're going to hear someone who has a corresponding vision from the field of fundamental moral values and beliefs. A noted author, a consummately profound thinker. We're privileged to hear him. And out of the creative and dynamic interaction with the grassroots and speakers like we have here before us, I think we can rest assured that there is a future for humankind. Dr.
This platform with Professor Carl Sagan. To me, two quite unexpected events surprised us this winter. One was the collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe. The other, to those of us who are observers, the thawing, if I may put it that way, of Professor Sagan's well-known attitude towards religion. And his willingness, which I welcome, to join with representatives of religion in caring for the earth. My delight to be here with him more than equals my surprise. Our present relations to nature are mostly indirect, utilitarian, and contrived. Nature is, for our practical existence day to day, primarily the supply house of raw materials for the industrial goods and the varied services we need in modern urban life, and the dumping ground for our refuse. Through scientific technology, we have come thoroughly to dominate nature, to remove most of her threats to us, so as to use nature for the purposes of our own well-being. Only our sporadic need for leisure promotes a different relation to nature. That's symbolized by the weekend or the summer vacation. This is hardly mutuality, interdependence. It remains dominion of a sort, but were it not for the political weight of this role of nature for our leisure, crying out for an unspoiled nature, the practical relation of technological production would log, strip mine, develop, and then pollute the whole thing bare. It is strangely appropriate that both Professor Sagan and I be here as representatives, perhaps, of science and of religion. For science and religion alike are deeply involved in the burning issue of nature. Each, both as part of the problem and potentially, as we've heard, as part of the answer. Science has provided our main and now our sole cognitive relation to nature. It is through science, physics, chemistry, astronomy, geology, and biology that in our age we feel we know what nature is, that is, what its reality is. It is further a dogma of our time that our only way to know is through science. And so nature is for us what the relevant sciences define nature to be. The heavy, not to say tragic, consequence of this for our subject comes from the fact that scientific method objectifies whatever it seeks to know. Thus, as known by science, nature becomes a system of objects, entities with external relations, with no inwardness, no for-itselfness, a system made up of homogeneous, quantitative, and quite purposeless parts. And because it is not for itself and has no value of its own, is not a reality, so to speak, in itself, nature becomes a fit realm to be used by our technologies for our purposes. Science knows officially only quantity, homogeneity, and causeness. An inert, vacuous, to use Whitehead's scornful term, purposeless, valueless, material nature. Nature as mere object becomes fit to be nature as raw material. No wonder Herbert Marcuse said the picture of the world modern science provides, if taken as all there is to nature, is the ideological justification for the industrial exploitation of the world. The scientific understanding of the world as a system of objects, and the scientific development and underpinning of technological industry have prepared first our minds and then our instruments for our fatal exploitation of nature. Yet, it's recognized, I say this as I see my colleagues taking notes, let us recognize, unofficially if not officially, science portrays a much more mysterious nature than it can scientifically describe. A cosmic development strangely ruled by telos, as Brian pointed out the other night. A wondrously fecund creative nature capable of life, of ideals, of even the scientific observer. A nature full of new and unexpected, random yet meaningful turns of wondrous novelty and diversity. This mystery of nature, yes, one may say the divine mystery, is intimated in every cosmology, even if it is scorned by scientific positivism. Another factor, however, must share the blame. Our religious tradition, the so-called biblical tradition. This is not simply a matter of dominion. To countless generations, that divine command to dominate the earth meant hunting, herding, fishing, clearing, and farming, precisely the cooperative relation of mutuality that preceded modern life. It did not, because it could not, imply the absolute control and use that make exploitation and desecration possible. Whatever they did to their own towns, medieval men and women hardly polluted Europe's rivers, made toxic its soil, killed its forests, fouled its air, or created the warming effect. Dominion has become destructive, and hence one can say demonic, only when it became a total and unchallenged dominance, when the theoretical know-how and the right instruments were there for our absolute human control. And that has only been in the last 3 modern centuries. The fault of the so-called biblical religions, Christianity and Judaism, lies deeper, ironically, precisely in that which is most creative in these traditions. The first element is familiar, the desacralizing of nature. In these traditions, God is one and transcendent to nature. Nature's forces, therefore, cease directly either to be or to manifest the divine. Nature is thereby stripped of both divine and demonic powers. This is surely a gain in understanding God. However, it is more ambiguous for our understanding of nature. This desacralization prepared the way for the strictly reductionist, mechanical, and inert understanding of nature that appeared with the development of modern science and modern technology. The desacralization of nature stripped nature of its sacred creative power and its inherent value. More importantly, our religious traditions failed to replace that sacred status with the apprehension of nature as a sign and instrument of the divine glory and the divine creativity. Secondly, for the common Jewish and Christian traditions, insofar as there is a common element, it is not nature that holds center stage, but people, with them community, and also history. The religious relations of God to men and women, and the moral relations of men and women to one another, represent the major concerns of true biblical religion. In none of this does nature figure in any really significant way. It is, in effect, merely the temporary stage on which the drama in present history of the relations of God to human beings and of the latter to one another are played out. Thus, in both traditions, nature is radically subordinated to history, as in earlier Christianity, history was subordinated to eternity. Nature has thus, in effect, been religiously ignored or demoted, creating a religious vacuum, so to speak, into which other interests could and did rush. The creative, religious, and moral command to honor, love, and serve human beings to recognize human dignity and to protect and increase human value, immensely creative for our subsequent cultural life, did not apply to nature. Nature had no soul. It is there only as an object among objects for our use, a means and not an end to which we were unconditionally obligated. In all of this that I've described, as if staged by a providential demon, we note how our scientific knowledge on the one hand, our technical and industrial power, our religious traditions, and our present sociological locus, most of us live in a human world, a world of human constructs, towns, cities, highways, colleges, factories, office buildings, not in nature, have worked together to lure us in the West into forgetting nature, while nonetheless, with the other hand, looking, one may say, the other way, we have pillaged, robbed, and exploited nature. As Senator Gore so eloquently said yesterday, neglect, indifference, even ignorance, are in no way innocent when they cooperate with, in fact, make possible exploitation. As dominant over nature, we threaten nature. As dependent on nature, we are thereby ourselves threatened. Because we are, as humans, in some strange ways more than nature, we can and do threaten her. Through all that makes us more, our intelligence, our practical ingenuity, our infinity of will, through the human in us, that same more, incidentally, which makes science and the scientific observer possible. We are also, however, part of nature. In fact, nature's child, a dependent and mortal creature among natural creatures, and thus we are threatened. The ecological crisis with nature reveals the paradoxes of our human being and our ambiguity, especially our moral ambiguity. Through the very wonder of our science and technology, wonders whose praises Professor Sagan has so persuasively sung, the terrible vulnerability of our contingency and mortality, as well as our ruling greed, have become manifest. Of course, if we were rational, we would at once control ourselves and cease to exploit and destroy. But we are not rational. Such self-control seems, for the moment, beyond us with regard to exploitation. We are also will, infinite desire, a seemingly unlimited greed, as well as objective observers. We seem not to want to save ourselves by saving nature, a kind of modern writing of St. Paul. Not if it requires real self-control and real sacrifice. Yet even more paradoxically, it is our very rationality, as modern culture has defined rationality, scientific inquiry, technological innovation, industrial practicality, and organizing genius, that together threaten nature, and with nature that same rationality. The paradoxes of human being portrayed by every profound religious tradition, but often ignored in a secular culture. Humans as infinite and finite, self-transcendent and creaturely, willing the ideal and yet enacting the destructive, image of God and yet fallen, to put it in the terms of my own faith, are evident here. The ambiguity of human beings vis-a-vis nature is as vividly portrayed in our modern scientific and industrial encounter with nature as in the most primordial of fertility myths and ritual sacrifices. Modern scientific culture has not matured itself out of our ancient historical dilemmas and self-contradiction. Rather, it exquisitely illustrates them. And dominant now over the fate of both history and nature, as in many an ancient myth, is an old enemy, in fact the oldest one, the final one, our own waywardness. For ruling over science, over technology, over industry, over our own politics, and so over our common history is what the Buddhists have termed desire, and our own tradition concupiscence, an infinite greed for goods, driving us where we don't want to go. The rescue of nature is necessary, and I agree, nothing in history is without hope. This is a fundamental religious apprehension. Its grounds are different in every religious faith, but we all share it. This is, first of all, of course, an issue for science. It has been morally concerned, and amazingly idealistic scientists like Professor Sagan, who have first understood and first warned us about these dangers, and who know, if any do, how we might deal with them. It is secondly an issue for public policy, and so for politics. And I suppose that's one reason we are in Washington. At bottom, however, these are spiritual matters, matters on the one hand of attitude, and on the other of moral choice. By attitude in this case, I mean our sense of kinship with nature, our sense of respect and of moral obligation to nature, and so the drive, deeper even than thought, to act in harmony with nature. But note, such spiritual attitudes depend on what we think the reality of nature to be, how, therefore, we also know nature. Spiritual attitudes lie back of all fundamental political movements and changes, as changes in Eastern Europe now witness. It is because of changes in such attitudes of respect for the other, of commitment to justice, and the discipline necessary for self-control that our tragic racial situation has eased a little bit. The new roles for women have also appeared. When spiritual attitudes change, laws can change, not before. Ecology is thus in part a religious issue and our responsibility. At the basis of political action lie spiritual attitudes to oneself, to others, to nature, to God. How we use our scientific knowledge, how we control or do not control our industrial and our commercial development, these depend also on our common moral choices as communities. And I agree thoroughly with Professor Sagan, these cash out into political action. And these depend in turn on our sense of obligation, the depth of our commitments, and above all, on our openness to some measure of self-sacrifice. Interestingly, in the most ancient religions, sacrifice, even self-sacrifice, realities that horrify the modern soul, was always necessary if men and women were to restore their abused or broken relation to nature. There is hardly a primordial myth that doesn't tell this story of the broken relation to nature and the need of some sacrifice to restore it. This gives me the creeps in relation to our present problem. The same now applies to us. Only if we have the moral self-discipline to be prudent, and prudence requires moral self-discipline. It requires control on ourselves. Can nature be saved? As we are learning, in order to enact, in this case, our clear self-interest, namely the rescue of nature on which we depend, immense self-discipline is necessary. Who would have thought these so-called primitive themes in relation to nature, the themes not only of the sacred creativity of nature of which I've spoken, but also of discipline and sacrifice, would return as relevant, even essential, to modern technological civilization? And let us recall this: such inward changes in us, the dominators, are in this case especially important. Here there are no exploited voices to cry aloud, no oppressed persons to march in our streets, to protest, to act in political rebellion. We can, if we will, continue to ignore all of this, continue to pursue our glut of consumers' goods, and die. Our rationality, our ideals, our good intentions being ruled by our greed. How then do fundamental spiritual attitudes change? For on them, we have suggested, depends the possibility of new moral obligations, commitments, and choices. And on these latter depend the possibilities of new public or practical policies towards nature. Both religion and science are part of the problem, as I've tried to note. Let us see how they might help in these changes of attitude. Attitudes and moral obligations represent, needless to say, especially the area for which religion feels responsible. We will therefore begin there. I wish to suggest an obvious but slightly heretical notion. Perhaps most creative notions are heretical. I don't know. History of theology seems to hint that, if not say it. We should proclaim and teach that nature is an image of God, imago Dei, a creature that is also a sign or symbol of God, as are we. Hence, nature has value in and for itself, as do we, an inherent integrity, order, and worth that we must respect as we do in the case of another person. Nature is a thou, as the great Martin Buber said, an image of its creator, and thus not merely our instrument or material, but a genuine other to us. Nature shows forth, mirrors as an image, the glory, the power, the wisdom, the infinity of its creator and preserver. In fact, the God of the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures is one imaged continually and conceived through the signs and traces provided by the grandeur, the power, the immensity, the order, and the beauty of nature. It is through analogies from nature, as well as from persons, community, and history, that God becomes God. Nature is not only a sign of God, it is also of ultimate concern to us. For the nature is the source of all life, and so of the future of life. Nature is, as nothing else is, our mother and creator. We not only tower over nature as observers and users, as scientists and technologists and vacationers, As creaturely humans, we all are also absolutely dependent on nature. Thanks to evolutionary science, we now know this in a quite new way, namely, that it is through nature that God has brought us into being and preserves us there. Interestingly and ironically, we have returned through scientific inquiry in our own age to this knowledge possessed and celebrated by all primordial religions. Let me reiterate this. Our changed scientific understanding of our origins has transformed, or should do so, our sense of our dependence on nature. Heretofore, most Western men and women have recognized their dependence in the present on nature for air, for food, for rain, and so on and on. But traditionally, in our minds, the creation of men and women by God was seen as a quite separate event from the creation of nature by God, as, so to speak, independent or separate creation. But now, believing Jews and Christians, who also accept, as do most of us in this room, the evolutionary account of our origins in nature, we now understand God's creative work in a quite different way, and this can be emphasized in all of our religious groups. God has created us as humans through nature, through the long, slow processes of development in nature, the long cosmic, geological, and finally biological processes that have produced first our cosmos, then our world, then life, and finally ourselves. A process of creation, though without its theological frills, elegantly described by Professor Sagan. In this sense, as for the earliest religions, nature is in fact our mother, the instrument God has used to produce us, much as God produces each one of us through our own mother and father. Our dependence on the divine for our existence in life is directly expressed in our dependence on nature. As primordial religion knew, in nature lie the sacred powers of life, of fertility, of community, of health, and of security, as well as the powers and order of existence. Both our scientific and our religious inheritance have heretofore been quite blind to this. One final word then about science, reality, and nature. As we have seen, as the creative source of our existence or being in all its facets, nature as infinite, as power, as order, life, and beauty, the reality of nature far transcends the inert, determined, external, vacuous system of objects pictured by empirical science. Although that scientific description is itself alive with deeper implications of mystery, implications of spontaneity, of novelty, of random changes evolving into life, with its self-direction, its purposes, its feelings, reactions, and finally consciousness and self-consciousness. Nature reveals itself in us as living subjects. It reveals itself in us as being, as power, and as life. And it reveals itself around us as strange, magnificent power and order. It is not only an object of our inquiries, it is also the living source of our being, including the being of the objective scientific inquirer who looks at and defines nature. Nature thus manifests itself to us as more than all we can know or ever could know of it. It manifests itself in ourselves as subjects as well as studied objects. as a mystery in part only fathomed by our empirical investigation. Science represents a wonderfully accurate, but nonetheless limited perspective on this wondrous mystery of the universe and the cosmos. The reality of nature creates us, supports us, lures us. It offers itself to our inquiries and to our use, but it eludes our final understanding as it will elude our final domination. This sense of nature's mystery, of its sacred mystery, and of its depth, integrity, and richness, and inherent value, can well supplement our attempts to objectify and so to use nature. Thus can a renewed, chastened, and humbled science, like a renewed and humbled religion, become a participant in the homage to nature rather than the cognitive basis for its exploitation. And only thus, in chastened partnership, can we begin to control that exploitation so as to rescue nature from ourselves, her children. Thank you.